Welcome to Module 3 of the Lighting Controls Acceptance Testing Training video series. In this module, we'll be discussing the compliance process and how it relates to acceptance testing. After watching the previous modules, you should be familiar with the significance of acceptance testing in the energy standards, as well as the related code requirements. In this module, we'll show how to apply that knowledge to the compliance process. You'll learn about the people involved in the compliance process, required forms, and how to tie that all together. Before we get into the compliance process, we'll start by looking at the people involved in filling out the paperwork, submitting documents, and granting approvals. There is a responsible person, a documentation author, and a field technician. The responsible person is in charge of the scope of the system design, construction, installation, materials, and manufactured devices. This person is also responsible for signing and submitting the certificate of acceptance. The responsible person could be an architect, a professional engineer, or a licensed contractor. The responsible person could be the ATT as well, but that's not usually the case. The next person involved in this process is the documentation author. The documentation author is responsible for preparation of the documentation. Again, this could be the ATT, but often it's a separate person who handles filling out the forms using the ATT's test results and information. And last, we have the Certified Lighting Controls Field Technician, who performs the acceptance test procedures in accordance with the specifications in Joint Appendix NA7 and reports the results of the acceptance test. The ATT must sign the acceptance test form regardless of if it was filled out by a separate documentation author using the ATT's results. Now that we're familiar with who is involved, let's take a look at the documentation and forms needed for lighting controls acceptance testing. There are three types of forms that are needed: the Certificate of Compliance, the Certificate of Installation, and the Certificate of Acceptance. First, let's look at what's needed for the Certificates of Compliance. The design team and responsible person are required to identify all required equipment and systems necessary to meet Title 24. They also need to identify systems that require acceptance tests. The certificate must be completed prior to applying for a building permit. It also must be incorporated into the building design plans prior to submission to the authority granting the building permit. The ATT will review the completed certificates of compliance to understand the scope and number of acceptance tests needed on a project. Next, we'll take a look at the certificates of installation. These forms require the installing contractor to identify all equipment and systems regulated by the standards and certify that these items have been installed in compliance with the regulations. Certificates of installation must be posted or made available with the building permit for inspection, and a copy must be provided to the building owner at occupancy. The ATT reviews these certificates to understand what lighting control devices were actually installed. And the last of our forms are the certificates of acceptance. For these forms, certified ATTs identify the equipment and systems that require acceptance testing per Title 24 Part 6. The certificate contains the results of all acceptance tests for the identified equipment. It also includes a declarative statement stating the equipment and systems performed as required by the code. Now that we're familiar with the different forms and people involved, let's tie everything together. The compliance process starts with the design and submittal phase. The designers or contractors on the project are involved in this phase and are responsible for completing the non-residential certificates of compliance, or NRCCs. The next phase is the construction phase. The installing contractors are involved in this phase and are responsible for completing the non-residential certificates of installation, or NRCIs. The last phase is the post-construction phase. During this phase, the ATTs are involved and are responsible for completing the non-residential certificates of acceptance, or NRCAs. The NRCAs must be completed by the ATT prior to final inspection and before the certificate of occupancy can be approved. Any problems identified during acceptance testing must be fixed and retested prior to final inspection. The certificate of acceptance must be posted or made available for inspection, and a copy must be provided to the building owner at occupancy. Now that we've covered the required certificates, we're going to take a look at the specific lighting controls forms that are needed for this process. We'll also be discussing the methods that ATTs can use to submit these forms. There are 5 lighting controls forms to consider: automatic shutoff controls, automatic daylighting controls, demand response controls, institutional tuning controls, and finally, outdoor lighting controls. Currently, all forms are completed electronically using the system offered by the ATTCP, under which the ATT is certified. The California Advanced Lighting Controls Training Program, or CalCTP, and the National Lighting Contractors Association of America, or NLCAA, are currently the only approved ATTCPs to offer training and certification for lighting. If forms are handwritten, do not contain the CalCTP or NLCAA logo, or are signed by a technician without a certification number, be suspicious. Remember, only certified technicians can complete lighting controls acceptance tests in California. ATTCPs maintain a list of certified acceptance test technicians on their respective websites. This list can be used to verify that an ATT is certified by looking up their name or certification number on the list. The ATTCP can also be contacted directly to confirm certification of an ATT. This concludes Module 3. For more information on lighting controls acceptance testing, please visit the Energy Commission website at www.energy.ca.gov/Title 24/ATTCP.